speaking, elections are not done just yet until the petitions arising from those elections are dispensed with. So the elections may have come, as I always say, but they've certainly not gone in their entirety. And we're getting right into those petitions and what to expect, managing expectations for Nigerians. And we're joined, as you can see, by Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Candide-Johnson, joins us virtually via Zoom this morning. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily. I know some people have asked with all of the senior lawyers and lawyers involved in petitions across the board, from the presidential, to the state election, they wonder what would happen to other cases. So maybe it's just start with that background to answer the questions which some have raised, thinking the courts will be occupied with just election petition. What happens to other cases? Will justice be served for those other cases that are not related to election petition as well?
Well, that is a major problem. The fact is that at the present time, judicial resources are disproportionately dedicated to election tribunal issues, to political contests, and the day-to-day disputations and problem solving which the courts should provide to ordinary Nigerians and to businesses is suffering dramatically. The election season is damaging to the administration of justice across the board.
Oh dear. I don't know how these things are weighed, because everybody deserves justice. But you, in a recent interview, you've talked about how this is a critical test for the judiciary. So let's start from that point. What did you mean by this being a critical test for the judiciary, really? Because, we know that the judiciary is meant to be independent, and really what comes out of the judiciary is expected to be at least the very best. So what did you mean by that?
I didn't mean to criticize the judiciary. I meant to indicate, as a matter of fact, what is provided by these political contests is the testing of the very independence, impartiality, and rationality of court processes and judgments. And so when, in any case, in an ordinary criminal case, in a commercial dispute, the parties know what the facts are, and very often their lawyers have told them what the law is. The only person who is an indeterminate factor is the judge who decides. And so, in many respects, it is the judge that is on trial in any single case, not just in political cases. But in political cases, that test comes under a very high and searing spotlight, and people look very closely. And because elections are such an emotive and disruptive, high-temperature event, judges have to be aware not only that the decisions they make will affect the political outcomes and the perspectives of people for years to come, but also that judgment of their action may be jaundiced by emotional responses, by political affiliations, by ideology. And some people, regardless of what the courts do, regardless of how clear an opinion is expressed by the court, will not believe it. But that's part of the condition in any political society.
Well, this election is unlike any other, really, in terms of the participation, the expectations from Nigerians, how much a lot of people were invested in it, the turnouts, well, maybe would leave that to later, but particularly the results that came out. We had at least 4 frontliners, as they say, and I don't think we've ever had elections outcome this close in Nigeria. So a lot of people are naturally focused on the election petition tribunal to see how things will happen. And of course, they have received lots of petitions. I was looking at 2019 and just seeing the time frame, because this is a major part of the conversation. Elections held February the 23rd, 2019. A petition was filed. Now, for the People's Democratic Party, which was the main challenger of that election, the petition was filed March 18th. And the judgment from the tribunal now was delivered 177 days after. So in terms of managing expectations, we're in 2023, there are lots of parties and candidates challenging the presidential result now. That's what we'll focus on for a start. What should they expect? What will go on now that I don't know if it will be televised? What will go on behind the scenes if it weren't televised?
Well, expectation in any case has to be moderated by the facts and circumstances that are in controversy. If I'm framing a case, I'm bearing in mind that it has a forensic aspect, and in a political case, has a political aspect, there are emotional aspects. Those who present cases and those who defend them have the obligation to manage the expectations of their own, if you like, clientele or constituency. So when you raise an election petition about a presidential election, you have a very wide canvas on which to paint. That canvas includes the contest in 176,000 polling units. Before you spoke to me, you outlined the limited grounds upon which an election can be challenged. The fact is that there's a declaration made by the statutory body charged with conducting elections, and there is a presumption of law that the acts of an official body are valid and correct. The onus, therefore, is on the person who seeks to dislodge that presumption to present evidence. It's not a matter of headlines. It's not a matter of sentiment. It's not a matter of human pathology. It's a matter of forensics. It's a matter of data. It's a matter of management of evidence, the confining of your case to specific targets. If you want to contest the election in 176,000 polling units, it's going to take you more than 180 days. So what you have to do, if you are managing the expectation and you're managing the chances and the impact of your case on the political outlook, is to target, according to your understanding of the electoral map, the areas where your strengths for upsetting the results are. You cannot bring evidence about 176,000 polling units. So you may say, well, I won in London, but I didn't win in Manchester. So I'm going to forget about Manchester. Let's assume Manchester is correct. Now, in London, there were problems with the election, and the number of votes I got there of which I was denied, were sufficient to have changed the direction of the election. There's no point in telling me about numbers that don't change the result of the election. So the construction of any case, more so a political case with such a wide canvas, requires skill and understanding, both of politics, of the electoral map, and of law by those who will present the case. And in that background, they have to manage the 180 days. If you only have 3 questions of law to decide before the tribunal, the matter could be decided next week. But if you have a multiple arrangement of facts, you want to manage those facts, you want to call witnesses, you want to analyze evidence of photography, of videos. If you build a case which is massively factual, then 180 days is a very short time.
And related to that, you know, it does seem like a lot of work for presidential election. You've outlined 176,000 polling units, and, you know, not to talk of the 28 states of the Federation where we had elections, and the countdown for 180 days has already begun. How fast, you know, can the process be? Are we looking at a situation where some of the petition tribunals may not be able to meet the target days of 180 days as mandated by the Electoral Act?
Well, you know, the 180 days is not a mystery. It has been stated in the electoral law, and it's been there before the election was conducted. So before you were nominated, and before you contested the election, you were aware that the process would end, and the part of the process was this 180 days. So there again, it is for you to manage. You know, if you look at examples in other countries, I like to look at the highly controversial election in the United States in 2000. The entire presidential election focused on the votes in Florida. Florida was the key battleground state where the outcome of the election in Florida would decide, and did decide, the 2004 election. They didn't go around calling for election results in Alabama, in Kentucky, in Ohio. They focused on where their challenge was viable and where their challenge was going to be decisive. And in 2004, because you have to prepare in advance, if you're an election, it's not just about the campaign. The election petitions process, which a candidate may activate, is part of the process of the election. So again, because in 2000, the Florida election was decisive of the presidential contest in America, in 2004, months before the election in 2004 presidential, the Democratic Party sent more than 500 lawyers to Florida alone. Why? Because they needed to anticipate that there would be a contest there, and that they must be prepared within a very short time frame to build a case, to manage it, and to present it in a compelling way that would be decisive for them. There's no point crying about milk that has been spilled if you were foretold that this milk was going to be spilled.
Now, analyses are already being made, comparisons with what happened in 2019 and some other years. In 2019, it is said that there were more election petition cases, and in 2007, I think the number was 1,200 plus election petition cases. And the analysis is to the effect that because we have just about over 400 post-election petition cases, the introductions into the Electoral Act have helped to reduce the workload on INEC. But really, if we look at it critically, has it changed our culture? Has it reduced the number of and quantum of electoral violence and ballot box snatching? Has it reduced our culture of electoral, the way we conduct our elections, so to speak?
Well, the short answer, I think, is yes. I think that data which is being revealed as this election goes on, notwithstanding evidence of disruption and irregularity in certain cases, is that the quality of the product has improved over the years, that many of the technological innovations, including those which failed, have created a more credible platform for testing the will of the people. I think that the potential for violence, the potential for ballot snatching, the potential for potential fraud, voter cheating, and corruption is always going to be available in a situation where there is a contest for a highly valuable commodity. And this is human nature. The task of the state and its resources is to limit the opportunities and the effect of those events and to punish those who participate in undermining the legal process. So this is something that must be done. But I think that to answer your question, in my own impression, the testing of this process will show that it is markedly improved in many respects. The BVAS, for example, even if it only worked 80% or whatever percentage they say, was able to exclude a vast number of illegal and unlawful votes. And by comparison to elections in previous years, I think that you will find that many of the abuses which were exhibited before have been eradicated. And it means that our democratic process, the system of testing the will of the people in this every 4-yearly event, is improving. Our democracy is maturing, and the process is becoming finer. And I think that we in Nigeria, we tend to concentrate on what we have done wrong. And that's fair enough because you want to improve that. But I think that we can take some pleasure in some of the things we have done right and that we are moving in the correct direction. I think that however disappointed any party may feel, however anxious or people may be about the result and about the prospect of whoever will take power after these elections, I think that Nigeria is moving forward. I think this is quite clear.
Well, let me come in here. I'd like to ask you about, and this is generally, because in many instances, yes, the elections have been received with mixed feelings, and this is the presidential, in fact, in some instances, elections leading up to the National Assembly, and also the governorship elections. In some instances, some people said, oh, the results seemed as clear as day, given what happened at the presidential elections. Permutations could already have been made regarding some states. I'm wondering whether you see, are you surprised by the election petitions that have, been filed in some states by political parties?
From a political perspective, I'm not surprised. Politics is about gathering the largest number of people around you to follow and support your ideas. And the electoral test is often an occasion for concentrating those people in these gatherings. If you lose an election, it's very likely that your support and your credibility will very quickly dissipate. So an election petition as a political tool is a means of extending expectation and keeping your constituency together. So I'm not surprised about that. I'm also not surprised about the permutation. I think that most people will understand if they had agents on the ground what exactly has occurred, and they will understand even the permutations that seem to confound expectation. People will have understanding of them. But politicians will take decisions in their political interest, not necessarily only on a forensic, legal, and mathematical analysis of the election results.
As a lawyer, does that bother you?
Well, you know, even in a land case, in a banking case, there's the law, there's the evidence, and there is the commitment of the individual to pursuing a remedy. In divorce, in disputes over family estates, people with legal rights must make a decision that suits them as to whether or not to pursue those rights. The existence of a right is not the only reason why you pursue it. You may consider other things as well. So it doesn't disturb me that any individual will take a personal decision as to how to pursue a right presumed or existent. But I have confidence in the forensic process which is deployed in the courts. I believe that if a case is presented to the highest ability and defended to the highest ability and efficiency, that the court is the best environment in which facts may be analyzed, data may be analyzed, arguments may be heard, and the best possible rational decision may be produced. So I have confidence in the system of justice. There have been aberrations in many decisions in the past, but there is no better instrument for determining truth than cross-examination and the analysis and presentation of evidence. And if a case is well conducted, it's very easy to blame judges and to put the burden on them. But the principal task of organizing, analyzing, and presenting a case is that of the lawyer who has the brief. If he presents a compelling case, it becomes increasingly difficult for a judge, no matter how ill-motivated such a judge may be, to divert from the truth as far as the facts and the law.
Okay, well, you've just spoken about evidence and making a compelling case. We know that, as with other matters, the burden of proof, beg your pardon, always falls on the petitioner. And some people have argued that in election matters, it should fall on the umpire of the elections. They think that INEC should bear burden of proof since they're usually joined in matters. And we've also seen some controversy in recent times with political parties alleging that it's been difficult for them to get access to election materials used to conduct the elections. In some states, it's causing a bit of controversy. Do you think that the next set of reforms should be looking at shifting the burden of proof to the umpire?
Well, let me say that it is true that in many of these contests, there are logistic, administrative, and sometimes malicious impediments to gathering evidence. I've seen this before in cases myself, and that is a problem. If the electoral umpire has the official custody of documents, they should also anticipate that those documents should be ready to be made available immediately upon an election. That is a failure on their part, and it is unacceptable that parties should have to struggle to get the material which is in public custody, which they need to present their case. But having said that, the question that you asked directly about onus of proof, I think that I don't want to say it's a lazy expectation, but the fact is that for the proper operation of administration, you have to assume that if you give a public body a legal mandate, it will act according to that legal mandate. If you feel it has not done so and you intend to bring a petition, you must have some idea. I spoke earlier on about the Democratic Party in the United States sending 500 lawyers to Florida, which means that before the election, they knew exactly where there were going to be problems, and they knew exactly how to tackle them, how to retrieve evidence, how to organize them, analyze them, and present them in a legal contest. If after the election, you are still trying to find out where the weakness of the presentation by INEC is, you're already starting way behind the starting block, and you have hobbled yourself to a great degree. But then you can't, to ask the electoral umpire to prove that the election was valid, all they need to do is present the electoral certificate and say, we presented an election roll on so date. They're mechanical aspects. You can't expect them to prove there was no ballot snatching. You can't expect them to prove that there was no falsification. You can't expect them to prove that there was no corruption or bribery. That is a task that is for the person who is challenging the result to anticipate, to gather, to organize, to analyze, and to present. So it's a deflection from the responsibility of the person who has to prove a case in every aspect of civil and criminal law. The legal prescription is that he who asserts must prove. There's a reason for that, because if you want to make a case, you are the one who should present it. You can't say your failure to disprove that there was irregularity is a foundation for my case. It doesn't make any rational sense.
Mr. Johnson, the election petition tribunals, as they stand, it looks like they've come to stay in our political circle. Someone will say, as far as it has to do with democracy, there will be those who would always want to contest whatever results come out there. But is there a chance that we might go past this sometime in our democratic process where we will not have this kind of contestations?
You know, we look with admiration at the stability of the electoral process in many other countries. And the UK is often a good model for us in this country because that country governed this country for many years. In the last, or the penultimate election in UK, an election petition was filed somewhere in the north of England. And the reporters pointed out that it was the first election petition against the appointment of an MP for 150 years. So 150 years ago, there was a high degree of contestation about elections, but they continue to improve the system. It's not that they didn't start from where they are. The testing of our electoral process, the development of jurisprudence on what needs to be proved, on how it needs to be organized, will continue to limit the challenges. When the electoral space is open and the law seems to be open, you're going to have multiple challenges because unhappy losers are going to find it difficult, having expended money and time and emotional expectation, to accept that they have lost. But as the jurisprudence of elections in our own territory continues to improve, people will understand that if you don't have this and if you don't have that, there's no point mounting electoral challenge. And so I'm not despondent at the high degree. It is normal for people to who are disappointed to look for solutions by whatever means there is. But I think that increasingly we will get to the stage where people realize that it's not worth it. You know, I'll give you another foreign example. In 1960, Richard Nixon lost the presidential election against John F. Kennedy by less than 65,000 votes. Many people asked him to challenge the election. They said that in Chicago, dead people voted, that people, the electoral register was manipulated. And it became a contest as to whether he would sacrifice the credibility of the presidential election over this potential that these 65,000 votes could be upturned. And he took a political decision that it was not worthwhile. Some people may say, I'll be a winner or I'll be a loser, but I won't be a sole loser. Because all electoral contests are decided by the people in the end, whether it's after the election that has gone before or the election that is to come. The electorate will take a view as to how you have conducted yourself, and it is part of your political presentation. And so in the case of Richard Nixon, 4 years later or 8 years later, he then was elected as president. He did not destroy his credibility as a political gladiator by what he saw at that stage to be an unnecessary and a contest which would paint him in a poor light. So these are personal decisions that candidates must take, and they must recognize that politics is perennial. It does not end after a single election, and even after the result of an election, whether good or bad, you must consider the consequences on your political career of how you respond.
You know, the example you gave of President Nixon and how the decision he made points to the fact, again, why we do have a democracy, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But that decision is by the people, for the people. So if we, at every juncture in our electoral process, have to go back to the court, there are those who argue that cases yes, I know you mentioned this earlier, the cases that should be looked at are not given attention because the judiciary is somewhat overburdened, so that they just fly over a lot of cases just so that they can get this out of the way, because there is a process of handing over to the next government, and that continues to go on in over and over and over again, somewhat slowing down the process of national growth. So then people ask the questions, what if we had special courts? I know the tribunal is a specialized court. I mean, special courts built and designated consistently and continually to handle cases of corruption and election offenses or electioneering processes, as the case may be. Could that help in any way?
Well, you know, the purpose of a special court, in my opinion, is to bring special skill and ability to the resolution of specialized questions. So in some countries, you have a technology court, or you have a court for commercial transactions or divorce. That can work. The legal issues in an election petition are not arcane or particularly sophisticated. They're about the management of evidence. Was there violence? Do the numbers add up? It's a simple enough forensic inquiry. The problem is not with creating a specialized court. The problem is, one, the volume of cases which courts have to deal with, and secondly, the logistical confusion and the logistical difficulty of organizing and presenting the cases. This, of course, also happens in ordinary cases. The system of processing cases that come before our ordinary courts is entirely inefficient. It is calculated to cause delay. It tolerates indolence and incompetence by lawyers, and that is a matter that requires specific reform itself. The administration of justice in civil and criminal areas in our courts needs to be fine-tuned dramatically in a way that allows the cases that come before the courts to be processed in an efficient and effective manner. So there's a problem with the organization of our system of justice apart from that. But it becomes accentuated in the limited area of electoral jurisprudence, where even though no particularly significant new area of law is being pursued, the sheer volume and the sheer grandstanding, the display of intransigence, the in many cases incompetence, the tardiness of lawyers. This is an area where, because there is such a sharp spotlight, everybody's being careful. And I think you will find that in electoral cases, a lot of bad behavior is tolerated from lawyers. And these are aspects of the efficient operation of the system of justice which ought to receive attention.
Let me just ask this one before my colleagues in Lagos come in, saying that, okay, this is where we are and this is what we have to deal with. We need to go to the courts to resolve all electoral issues almost every electoral cycle. What should the candidates and their teams be doing? For instance, recently the candidate of the president-elect, his representatives were having a media party talking about evidence here or no evidence there. Should that be happening?
Well, those are political decisions. The fact is that because this is a political contest, affecting the public's perception is something that is relevant for the parties who are presenting cases. And it's a fine line. You're commenting on a pending case and the impact it may have on the administration of justice in that case is a line that lawyers must watch, because they must be careful that their interventions outside the court do not adversely impact what is going on in the court. But people are going to take political decisions, and it's not sufficient to win in the court. Again, you refer to courts deciding political matters. When a court decides a political case, whatever their decision, that decision is going to be tested by public perception, and it's going to be tested on the ground. Ultimately, every political contest is decided by the people. Regardless of what decision comes on paper from INEC, there's a process for challenge. Irrespective of what decision comes by a judgment of the court, it has to manifest. So I remember the joke in 1983 when the elections were held in Ondo and there was huge disruption on the ground. And the governor-elect of Ondo State was accepting congratulations while in Lagos. And somebody asked jokingly, why don't you accept congratulations on the ground in Ondo State? If you won an election, you should have immunity on the streets of the area where you have won elections. So there is a test beyond the judicial process. If the court says that somebody has been elected to an office, he has to go back and manifest himself in that office on the ground. Of course, I know that some representatives will remain in Abuja for all their tenure, but then if you are representing people in Sokoto or you're representing people in Ibadan, they should see you physically in those places, and the acceptance that you have on the streets is, in my opinion, the best test of your success in electoral office.
Some will call that street credibility, but two quick issues from me as we begin to wind down. First, you have a case where INEC defends the outcome.
I've lost sound. I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Oh, great. I was just, saying that is called street credibility, the point you made. But two quick points for me. You have a case where INEC is defending the outcome of the election. Also, the party that won, the candidate that won, is also defending the result of that election against the loser in this case, one person, one candidate and its party. And some say, well, this looks like 2 against 1. Is that an anomaly? Because people also interpret that in different ways. So maybe shed more light on that for people who might be seeing that as a 2 against 1 situation.
I'm not so sure what that means. The fact is that if you contest an election with 15 people, it's 1 against 16, it's 1 against 14. So this is the map that was drawn. If an electoral contest is open to anybody who qualifies, then you're against all those people. And you must anticipate that any one of those people could challenge election results. So I don't think that the number is relevant. If you are the winner of an election, you really have to defend your election against everybody who was in the contest. And so you must anticipate that it'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 against 1. I don't think that's unusual or in any way remarkable.
Well, so I was saying that INEC is usually on the side of the winner, in quote, defending that same election results. That's the point I'm trying to make, against whomever is, challenging, who's petitioning the case. So some say that it's usually stacked against the petitioner who has to deal with INEC defending the result and the winner defending the result. I don't know if that comes across.
No, well, the fact is that INEC is intended to be an impartial statutory body. It has presented a result, and it would be unusual for an official body to come and say that the result that it had presented was not correct. So you must assume that whoever is declared the winner should have INEC on his side, because INEC, having resolved the election by presenting a certificate, has determined that one person won the election. That's not unusual. To expect anything else would be absurd. To expect that the umpire, having declared a result, it's like asking a judge to decide a case and then to issue a press conference saying, even though I've given judgment for the plaintiff, I really think that the defendant has won. It would be absurd, and it would by itself undermine any credibility that the decider of that issue has.
Well, as we wind down now, Mr. Candide-Johnson, the 4-yearly cycle, this season, it goes without saying that it's a time of harvest, so to speak, for, our lawyers. INEC itself said, after the primary election, that it had been joined in 1,241 intra-party lawsuits in different courts of law. And, some of the cases were needless. I'm just wondering, isn't that part of the problem? And going forward, if there were to be reforms, what would be your thinking in terms of reforms, in this area particularly, where lawyers smile to the banks? Doesn't that encourage, the huge number of litigations that we have trailing post-election cases, even from the primary level, and what we have now?
Well, I don't have any problems with lawyers earning a living. Let this be said, first of all. I like the characterization of the electoral season as some sort of harvest. And for those who are involved deeply in electoral politics, it is some sort of economic bonanza. I'm happy for them. But lawyers don't make cases. lawyers are approached when people have a grievance, and the job of the lawyer is not just to think about what he will earn, but to determine whether there is a factual and legal basis for the case he's presenting, and whether it's worthwhile on many grounds to make that presentation. Now, I recognize that some lawyers will make that decision entirely on their economic interest. This is unethical, and this is a form of misconduct, which is a matter for the legal profession itself to regulate. If a lawyer in many jurisdictions brings a case which is doomed to failure, he will risk his license to practice, because courts take the view, a very strong view, against lawyers deliberately wasting their time. And if a case is manifestly unwinnable, or a lawyer manufactures, massages, or misrepresents evidence, or lies to the court in order to present a case, that lawyer has no rights to continue in the legal profession and should be disbarred. That is a very clear fact.
Right.
So this is one way of regulating the behavior of lawyers and ensuring that the filter of legal advice is faithful and that it produces only cases that have a genuine viability for success.
Well, great point there. Quickly, we know that as the court is sitting, there are people who are also conducting some sort of parallel tribunals, on social media, taking a look at all of the, the cases and all of that. And some believe that the system is maybe loaded against them. And these are opinions expressed now and then. Some have said this must be televised. And I wonder if that would affect the independence of the court in any way. But particularly to those people who believe that the system is loaded against them, what do you have to say to them as we wind down now?
Well, any publicity that is given to legal process is good. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. But I think that people tend to obsess about things that are not particularly significant. I have no difficulty with the process being televised. It's entertainment. And the better people can see what has actually gone on, the more likely they are to accept the result. Some will not accept the result irrespective. But it took, again, hundreds of years for courts to be allowed for cameras to be allowed to the courts in the UK. And even in other countries up till today, there are certain proceedings which cannot be televised. But in an electoral case, if people want to watch the process of the presidential election, for example, over the next 180 days, by all means they should. I don't think there's any difficulty in being seen, as long as it's not disruptive to the proceedings.
Oh, I think that's a great place to leave it. I was going to ask if, you know what, never mind. Thank you so much, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Yemi Candide-Johnson. Just got me thinking about, the billions of naira that will be spent during this process. And we'll have this conversation again, hopefully, in the coming days, because this is very important to Nigeria's democracy. But again, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program this morning, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Well, we'll go to break now. You have some insight into what to expect, but we're turning our attention to something equally important. It concerns the money in your pocket, your business, and all that has to do with Nigeria's economy yesterday, today, and in the coming days. Stay with us.